I think my fifth grade self would have freaked out, would have completely freaked out. It was really fun. DC Comics offered me Superman, and I felt like that was not something that I could turn down. It was wild to get that phone call. I try to write from a lived experience, and then I try to live out my faith. When you do that, the faith that ends up in your books, like if it shows up, sometimes it's more obvious than other times, but it'll always be like a little bit ragged around the edges. That's kind of the way faith feels when it comes through that way. Hi, I'm Luen Yang. I am an InterVarsity alum, and I work in comics right now. I am a cartoonist and a comic book creator. Currently, I am writing the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Welcome to InterVarsity World Changers.
Gene, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you. Gene, you are, I've got a list of things here that I know about of who you are. Gene, you are an award-winning author and cartoonist. Your work has been adapted for television by Disney Plus. You've collaborated with DC Comics, Marvel Comics, Dark Horse Comics on some major characters in those respective universes. You are a huge advocate for young readers. You live in the Bay Area with your wife and your 4 kids, and you're an InterVarsity alum as well. Gene, what did I miss that would help us keep getting to know you?
That was pretty good. Yeah, you definitely did your homework. I'm very impressed.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm excited to hear about where some of these elements weave themselves in and out of your story, and the places that you've gotten to partner with God in his world-changing work. To start angling us in that direction, Gene, can you just tell me, what is it about the medium of graphic novels and comics that attracts you? Like, what do you love about that form of artistry?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm the son of 2 immigrants. My mom was born in mainland China, my dad in Taiwan. They both eventually made it to the United States for graduate school, met, fell in love, and had me and my brother. Growing up, both of my parents really loved to tell me stories, to tell us stories. My mom would read Chinese language storybooks to us. My dad would kind of make stories up off of the top of his head. And I think it was their way of connecting us, their children, to the culture that they left. So I grew up in a house full of stories. And I also grew up drawing. My mom tells me that I started drawing when I was 2 years old, and I basically never stopped. So comics for me is really a way of telling stories through drawing. I remember buying my very first comic book from a spinner rack at our local bookstore when I was in 5th grade. My mom took me there. I think I had to buy like a book for school or something. I don't totally remember. What I do remember is getting a copy of DC Comics Presents number 57, starring Superman and the Atomic Knights. And that was sort of the beginning of my comic book obsession.
Yeah. I love that. I love that there's this element of excitement and youthful excitement and intrigue that's in the midst of this, but also these elements of creativity. And there's like family history and cultural history that's like interwoven into this love for you, that this medium creates space for all of those elements to weave themselves together.
Yeah, I think this is something I've thought about. I didn't think about this as a kid, but I have thought about this as an adult. If you look at traditional East Asian art forms like Chinese brush painting or Japanese printmaking, there's almost always this pairing of words and pictures. Like a Chinese brush painting. My aunt, who is no longer with us, she was an excellent, amazingly talented Chinese brush painter. And in Chinese painting, it's not like European painting. In Chinese painting, when you're done with the image, the artwork itself is not done until you pair it with like a poem on the side. And that's why if you look at like old Chinese brush paintings, there's always these words that run along the side. And both of those elements really have to be masterful in order for the entire thing to be considered masterful. And in a lot of ways, that's like a precursor to modern comics, right? Modern comics are this combination of words and pictures, and both of them have to work together in order for the entire thing to be considered successful.
Wow. So these ancient Chinese brush paintings are sort of like the OG comic book.
Yeah. Some people argue. Yeah, specifically Japanese printmaking. Some people argue that around World War II, there are these traveling storytellers in Japan, and they would carry sequences of images with them, and then they'd sit in the middle of the village. All the kids would gather around, and they tell stories using these sequence of images.
Wow.
So people say that might be the beginnings of modern comics. There's among geeks, this is like a discussion.
This is amazing. I love this. This feels like a whole nother conversation that we need to have, Gene, because I'm like fascinated about this history right here. I love it. And actually it brings me to a question that I would really like to ask you, that I'd actually like to have you answer post credit for us. So
sure.
Any good like modern superhero enjoyer of superheroes is very familiar with the post credit scene. So I'm hoping that you could be a part of a post credit scene for us here. So I'll ask the question now, and then you and I will chat about it at the end of the podcast. But so related to what you're talking about for storytelling and these elements that have been woven in for telling stories, if you could take any well-known comic book character, maybe in particular one that you haven't worked with yet, and if you could tell any story that has not been told yet, what would it be? So we'll circle back to that post-credit. I really want to know what your question. I really want to know what your answer to that would be. For now, though, Gene, tell me about college. You're a cartoonist who did not major in the arts. Why was that? What was happening for you there?
I loved art all the way through growing up. I was the kind of kid who would sit in class and fill up the margins of my notepaper with doodles. So I was constantly drawing. I dreamed of either being a comic book creator or being an animator. I had kind of wanted to go to art school or major in art. But the problem is I have immigrant parents, Okay. And to be fair, my mom actually was very sympathetic to my love of art, but my dad is much more practical. A lot of immigrant parents are like this. They work very hard to make it in America, and they don't want you to mess it up. So before I went to college, my dad sat me down and he's like, you could do anything you want as long as it's doctor, lawyer, or engineer. So I ended up picking engineer. Yeah. I majored in computer science, and some of that was also, I did really enjoy my computer science classes in high school, but my heart was definitely with art. And eventually I graduated. I went to UC Berkeley. I majored in computer science, but I did minor in creative writing. And so the major was for my dad. The minor was more for me. And and I remind him nowadays, over and over again that my minor is actually much more useful to my career right now than my major was.
Yeah, you're probably not the first InterVarsity alum to really capitalize on their minor in some ways. Hey, this is eventually I'm gonna have an opportunity to put this to work in some pretty fantastic ways. And I have noticed that you refer to yourself, correct me if I'm wrong, but you do refer to yourself as an author who sometimes draws cartoons or something to that effect. Yeah. So it'd almost be like the writing is what you would put forward as like, this is the thing that I spend most of my time doing.
Yeah, that's right. I started off, as a cartoonist, which is somebody who both writes and draws. But more recently, I have taken on many more writing jobs than both. So on most of my projects, I'm teamed up with another artist, and I'm just doing the script.
Okay, gotcha. Well, so then let's sit back on campus for a moment here, because aside maybe a B story that's going on here, and not B as in secondary, but a side story that's happening along with you here is this is around the time that you're also meeting InterVarsity. Can you tell me about where that relationship comes to life?
Sure. So I grew up in a Chinese Catholic church. I'm still a practicing Roman Catholic. And before I left for college, one of the adults at my church who I admired, named Mr. Koo, he was very involved in the church community. And he was interesting in that he was Catholic, his wife was Protestant. And they were very involved in two churches. I felt a little sorry for their kids, because they would actually go to a Protestant service in the morning and then do the Catholic service in the afternoon. So their kids would be in church for like 8 or 9 hours every Saturday. But they were incredibly faithful, incredibly faithful people.
Wow.
And he sat me down before I went to college, and he was like, you need to work on your faith before, you know, in college. As much as you work on your academics, you need to work on your faith. And he listed a bunch of groups that I could get involved in, including the Newman Center, which is the Catholic group on most campuses.
Yes.
And he also listed InterVarsity. So once I got on campus, and you know, like InterVarsity people are just all over the place. So I got invited to an InterVarsity small group that was meeting in my dorm. And I remember that name from my conversation with Mr. Koo. So I ended up going, and that's sort of how I got involved. I do have to say though, like my experience with InterVarsity was life-changing for me, you know, and it could be, I grew up within a faith tradition, right? I grew up in a faith community, but it was never my faith. It was something that, like, my mom converted Catholicism shortly after coming to America. My dad converted, maybe when I was around like 8 or 9 years old, sometime around that. So it always felt like it was my mom's faith. And then we were just kind of tagging along, right? And it was really in the context of InterVarsity that, you know, like a relationship with God became my own, as opposed to something that was sort of borrowed from my mom, who I admired, but it was definitely a borrowed faith.
Yeah. Are there moments that stand out to you is there a, hey, this really represents my experience with InterVarsity and some of those transformational moments that were happening on campus for me? Yeah.
I mean, Bible study every week was super important. I met my closest friends in college through those Bible studies. But the moment that cinched it was really a fall conference my freshman year. You know, I was not really planning on going. And then they were just so pushy about it. Like the Bible study leaders were so pushy about it. And I ended up going. Okay. And I remember, you know, being there at that Saturday, being in the small group there and sharing about how, you know, I just don't think I could ever be completely sure about God's existence. I remember telling them that, you know, despite growing up in church, I don't know if I could ever be sure about God's existence. And then that night, Saturday night, they had this extended, worship and prayer session. I have a very small bladder. I still have a very small bladder to this day. So like within half an hour. Let me
know if we need to pause at some point, Gene.
Yeah, I will. I absolutely will. But about half an hour in, I had to go to the bathroom. We were in this campsite. So I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, I was under the night sky. It was a very clear, very warm night. I could hear the worship music coming from the hall, you know, from the fellowship hall, but I was still out in the woods, and it sort of just hit. It's sort of like the reality of God, like that, you know, I've had my doubts since then. Definitely. I've struggled with doubt since then, but that was probably the moment that, God felt the most real to me, right? Like I could not doubt anymore. And I think, you know, within certain Christian traditions, that would be seen as like a born again moment, right? That's how some Christians describe what happened to me, under that night sky. But the way that came about was, I felt like God made me reconsider experiences that I had within the church community that I was growing up in. And I'll give you an example of one. Yeah. So there was a priest, who was from Taiwan, who, would come periodically, you know, and visit our church community, and he would celebrate mass. And, he claimed to have the gift of healing. So I was all the way through growing up, I struggled with asthma. Like my asthma was bad enough where often I would miss days of school toward like right before winter break because my asthma would flare up to the point where I couldn't go to school. So it's pretty bad. So, you know, my mom took me to see doctors at Kaiser. You know, she took me to see Chinese medicine doctors as well in San Francisco, Chinatown. So we kind of tried everything. I tried like acupuncture and acupressure, everything Western and Eastern, and just nothing really made that big of a difference. And then one night this priest was actually staying with a family within our community. So we went to that family's home to visit this priest because he said he wanted to pray over people. And got in line. I watched people get prayed over. And then when it was my turn, he prayed over me. And when he prayed over me, in my mind, I saw Christ coming towards me. But it was like the way people appear when you look at them through tears, right? It's very like, and to be honest, to be clear, like at that age, I was like, not sure where my imagination began and ended, right? So,
yeah,
right. So I felt that. I felt him, I saw him touch my chest. My chest felt warm. I went home. I coughed up a bunch of phlegm. And then, in junior high, we used to run the mile every other day for PE. So the next day I ran the mile and I was a minute faster than I'd ever been. I was a minute faster than I'd ever been. Right. And then I was like kind of astounded. I started talking to my friends about it and they're like, people grow out of asthma, right? People like that's a thing that's supposed to happen is people grow out of asthma. So eventually I sort of just pushed that out. And then when I was at that fall conference under those stars, that was one of the experiences that I felt like God was sort of, pushing back into my head and asking me to reconsider. And the thing is, like, within the Catholic Church, miracles have certain requirements in order for them to be seen as miracles, right? And mine does not qualify because eventually, like in my 20s, my asthma came back. So that's not supposed to happen, right? But for me, like the way I interpret it is the healing that I experienced in 7th grade was not about asthma. It was actually in preparation for that moment that I had under the stars with InterVarsity, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. The history of that story and those pieces falling into place and some of those moments that, in your mind, you had opportunities to sort of explain them away and that those are exactly, and you say that's just one example, but that those are the things that in that moment under the stars, being able to hear the worship happening at fall conference in the distance, that was the moment that the Lord met you and started to sort of like reframe. I've been walking with you through all of these things. Like that has been me at all. And now I want you to see that much more clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. I love that story. And I love that an InterVarsity fall conference, even if it was after a lot of goading from your, from small group leaders, right, lovingly urging you, that you were there and met Jesus in such a powerful and amazing way. That's phenomenal. And so Gene, I wonder then, where does the pivot happen for you? There's some moments in that come up in your career that I really want to ask you about. But how do we get to that point where you've done this? You're graduating with a degree in computer science, but then you do end up as a cartoonist. Like, where does that professional turn happen for you?
Yeah, after that fall conference, I got pretty heavily involved in InterVarsity. I ended up being a small group leader when I was a sophomore, and then all the way through, involved in different ministries. My closest friends from college are all from InterVarsity. We just spent a lot of time together. I mean,
nice.
I do think sometimes we went overboard, right? I remember maybe junior or senior year, I had meetings like 6 out of 7 nights every week, which might be too much,
That sounds right.
But I do think it just like my experiences with InterVarsity just had a really profound impact on not just my faith, but just how I see the world in general. And I ended up going on volunteer staff for a year. After college, after graduating with my computer science degree, I got a job as a programmer, and I was part-time as a computer programmer for a small company in Emeryville. And then I went on this silent retreat for 5 days. So it was put on by another priest that so he was actually an academic, and he taught at the University of San Francisco. I might be wrong about that, but I think that's it. And his name was Father Malatesta. So he spoke Chinese, even though he himself was not Chinese. And he was really heavily involved in the youth ministry at the church that I grew up in. So he would run retreats for us. And then there was a group of us that had sort of grown up in this Chinese Catholic community. And we were all in our 20s, and he's like, you guys should do a silent retreat. So he set up this 5-day silent retreat for us. And I went, I've never done anything like that ever since. So for 5 days, I didn't talk to anybody except for an hour a day with Father Malatesta. And out of that time of silence, I made a couple of decisions. One was I was going to I'd been sort of dabbling in comics up until this point. And then after that, I was like, I'm gonna kind of double down on it, right? I'm gonna take it. It's not gonna be a job, but it's gonna be like an vocation. It's gonna be something more than a hobby for me. And then two is I decided I was gonna leave my programming job and become a high school teacher. So I did. I ended up leaving my programming job. I became a high school teacher at Bishop O'Dowd High School, a Catholic school in Oakland. And I was there for 17 years. I taught mostly computer science. I taught a little bit of math and a little bit of art, but mostly computer science. And that's sort of like at that point, I'm in my mid 20s. That's the way I imagined my life was going to go. I was going to be a high school teacher, and I was going to do these comics on the side,
Okay.
And then things shifted, as the years went on.
Yes. Well, I mean, speaking of things shifting as the years went on, I believe at the time of this recording, Gene, that we are in the midst of like the 20-year anniversary of American Born Chinese. Am I remembering correctly about the timeline there? Okay. Right. So, I mean, that was and continues to be massively popular and influencing people, award-winning. And so I wonder, when you were creating American Born Chinese, what were you hoping to teach people through what you were creating there? And thinking about new people who are discovering it today, what is your hope for them today as they are encountering this 20 years later? Yeah,
it's been stunning to see that people are still reading that book. That book began as a self-published book. I was writing and drawing it at home, while working as a high school teacher during the day. So I would work on it at night, or I'd work on it on weekends. And then I was self-publishing it, which meant that I would finish a chapter, and then I would take it to my local photocopy shop. I'd run off photocopies. I'd staple them by hand. Wow. And then I'd go to local conventions to sell them by hand. Or there were a couple of bookstores in Berkeley also that were really supportive. So one was called Eastwind Books, which was an Asian American bookstore. And then another one was called Comic Relief, a comic book store. So both of them actually had this shelf where self-publishers could just sort of put their books. So they let me put my book there, and then I come back like a month later to see if any of them sold, and they give me a little bit of money. They did. Okay. So that's kind of how I started. And at the time, I'd met like a group of young cartoonists who all lived in the Bay Area, and we were all kind of at the same point in our careers. We're all trying to break in. So we started meeting together. We met together once a week at somebody's house. We would eat dinner together, and then we would draw next to each other, and we would look over each other's comics and kind of give notes. So I never got to go to art school because I had immigrant parents, but I feel like that period of my life, right? Those years hanging out with those cartoonists, that was sort of like my art school. So, so that's kind of how it went, all the way through. American Born Chinese took me 5 years to finish from beginning to end because I had a day job, but all the way through, I was getting feedback from this crew of cartoonist friends that were meeting weekly. And then eventually I got connected with First Second Books, which is a subsidiary of Macmillan. Okay. They are a graphic novel imprint. And the way I got connected with them was through a friend from that crew of Bay Area cartoonist friends. So I have a friend, his name is Derek Kirk Kim, incredibly talented cartoonist. One of the most talented storytellers that I know, to this day. So he recently had a book come out from Image called Royals. It's not for kids. It's definitely an adult book, but it's like sort of a crime thriller that's really amazing. But in 2003, he won all 3 major comic book industry awards. He won a Harvey, an Ignatz, and an Eisner. And after that, publishers started approaching him. Because he's such a good friend, he introduced me to one of the publishers that approached him. And it wasn't just that. He actually took my self-published comics and he reformatted them into something that looked a little bit more professional, paying for the binding himself.
Wow.
And then so that was like maybe 9 out of the 10, I'm sorry, it was 8 out of the 9 chapters of American Born Chinese were done at that point. And then he sent it for a second book, sent it to Mark Siegel, who's the head editor there. And eventually Derek made that connection. So Mark signed me and I've been with For a Second for 20 years, but it really is the result of like this friendship, with Derek.
That's amazing. If there's an alum who's listening right now who hasn't read it and decides, hey, I want to go pick that up, what is it that you hope that they will take away from it as they sit down and read through this?
So when I was working through American Born Chinese, it was really about like when I was growing up, I did go through a period of time where I didn't want to be me. Specifically, I didn't want to be Chinese American. It was sort of maybe late elementary school into junior high and high school. I think that was when, I don't think it's just true of like, ethnic minorities, right? I think it's true of a lot of people where around that time you start feeling uncomfortable with your own skin.
Yes.
And for me, that was like, I started feeling uncomfortable with, my parents' accents, with the food that we ate at home, with even the way I looked, all of that stuff started feeling uncomfortable to me. And then, I think junior high also has this way of bringing out the jerk in people. So I experienced like, I think people would say unkind things about my cultural background to me in junior high, and to be perfectly honest, I also said things in the same vein to other people as a way of dealing with the discomfort that I had inside, right? So American Born Chinese was sort of a way for me to work through all that. I think a lot of authors and artists, we make stories and we make art as a way of kind of working through these things in our own heads. So that's sort of what American Born Chinese was. And my hope is that for anyone reading it, anyone who's gone through a period of their lives where they did not want to be who they are, that they would feel like they were a little bit less alone after reading that book.
Wow. What an amazing invitation. And I mean, especially as we think about what it looks like to consider ourselves in the whole of the body of Christ, and to be very purposefully created, and the diverse set of stories that we bring with us through our lives, and to say, hey, there is something beautiful and unique and meaningful to find in the midst of the stories. They're broken stuff as well, absolutely, for every one of our stories, but that there's something to sort of gather around and to say, hey, this is who I am, this is how I've been made, and these are the things that I bring to the table, and there's something to be proud of there, appropriately proud of, that God has equipped me to get to bring along. Those feel like a lot of the things that we talk about, as we were students with InterVarsity, is like, man, what is the thing that you bring to the table that God's inviting you to lean into in this community of people?
Yeah, that's right. At our chapter, when I was going through, InterVarsity, Henry Nouwen was really big. People were reading In the Name of Jesus and talking about it. And that's a big theme, right? That runs through all of his work, is about how often where we feel the weakest is where God can use us the most.
Yes, absolutely. Gene, another sort of landmark moment. I would assume that you would consider this a landmark moment. You mentioned your 5th grade self and this first comic that you bought featuring Superman. And in 2019, you created a limited series of Superman stories. And I wonder, what would 5th grade Gene have said if you could go back and tell him, hey, listen, down the road, we're going to create a set of stories for Superman. So just hold on. It's going to be super cool. Like, what would your response have been in 5th grade?
Yeah, I think my 5th grade self would have freaked out. Would have completely freaked out. It was really fun. That was why I ended up having to leave teaching. I really loved being a high school teacher. It was a really fun job. I loved the community that I was in. I was there for 17 years. So after being in a place for that long, you make a lot of connections with the place. So it was very hard to leave. And ultimately, the reason I left was because DC Comics offered me Superman. And I felt like that was not something that I could turn down,
Yeah, and nobody faulted you for saying yes to that.
Yeah. It was wild. It was wild to get that phone call. Wow. But to be honest, my first year, writing Superman was really hard. It was actually maybe my least fun year of doing comics ever. Yeah, wow. Yeah. And a lot of it I think was just me. Like I'd come out of the world of graphic novels where the pace of creating graphic novels is much closer to like the pace of creating a prose novel. There's the deadlines aren't crazy tight. Whereas a monthly superhero comic like Superman, the deadlines are really tight. Like you gotta get it done. You gotta get 22 pages done every month.
Wow.
So it took me a long time to get used to that pace. It also took me a long time to get used to writing in somebody else's universe. So the DC universe, it's almost like this living thing where things that happen in other books actually affect the story in your book. And you just have to scramble. A friend of mine named Greg Pak, he's award-winning superhero writer, has been doing it much longer than I have. He did a book called Planet Hulk. So if you've seen the movie Thor Ragnarok, a lot of that draws on his work in Planet Hulk.
Interesting.
But when I was starting, he's sort of my mentor. And he was like, writing superhero comics is a little bit like improv, where people are throwing suggestions at you left and right, and you just got to figure out how to work it in, And I think he's right about that. Like the DC universe throws stuff at you, and you got to kind of work it into the story that you're trying to tell. It took me a long time to get used to that.
Yeah, you bring up something that I've been wondering about as you talk about just some of the difficulty of writing the story in a universe that is so much bigger than. However awesome the stories are that you're writing for it, I mean, they are a small piece of something that is so much larger. And I'm wondering whether it's, whether it's writing for DC in the Superman part of the universe, whether it's working alongside of Disney Plus as they're adapting your content, or if it's just sitting across the table from somebody at Comic-Con that you're talking to. I mean, what are the ways that you that faith is integrated into those moments, and like what are some of the tripping hazards that you have to navigate as you think about developing these stories and interacting with people and staying true to the narrative arc and also being true to the way that God has been at work in your life and the ways that he's been forming you? How do you navigate all of those pieces in one art form?
Yeah. My creative writing minor plays into this.
Okay.
I remember, being in college, writing stories for my creative writing classes. And I remember trying to write about faith for the very first time and getting a terrible, terrible grade. Right.
Okay.
And I didn't try again in that class. And then, I got to my next class. It was taught by, a woman named Thaisa Frank, who is, a novelist herself, an award-winning novelist herself. And I remember going into her office hours to talk to her about this. I was like, I feel like faith is, like the central part of my life.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how to write about it. And she was, I remember she was of Romanian descent. She was a Romanian American.
Okay.
And she was a practicing Buddhist. So faith, a faith tradition was very important to her as well.
Yeah.
But I remember also thinking like, our ancestors must be so mad right now, right? she's this Romanian American Buddhist, and I'm a Chinese American Catholic. In any case, what she told me was, you should just. She talked to me about Flannery O'Connor first, and then in using her as an example, which I did find helpful. But she also said, you should never write directly about your faith. You should write about your life. You should write about your life, right? And you should live your faith. And if your faith is actually important to you, not just something you say, but if it actually is important to you, it will end up showing up in your stories. Wow. So I have tried to follow that advice ever since then. So people miss it, but there are biblical references to in American Born Chinese. Like there's a reference to. There's actually a direct quote from Psalm 139, which was a verse that a Bible study leader gave me when I was during my time at InterVarsity. And then I did an adaptation of the Rosary prayer, which is a very popular prayer within the Catholic Church. Right. And then for my books with First Second, I think my most explicitly religious book is Boxers and Saints, which came out in 2012. It's about the Boxer Rebellion, which is a war that was fought on Chinese soil in the year 1900, and faith played a role within the historical narrative, right? But that's something that I think about all the time. I think back to Professor Frank's advice all the time, like when I'm working on my books, right? I try to write from a lived experience, and then I try to live out my faith, right? And I think when you do that, the faith that ends up in your books, like if it shows up, sometimes it's more obvious than other times, but it'll always be like a little bit dog-eared, right? It'll be a little bit ragged around the edges. Because it's not a new pair of sneakers, right? It's like this dirty, kind of crusty pair of sneakers that you've worn for a long time. That's kind of the way faith feels when it comes through that way.
Yeah. Well, and there's something really meaningful about the times that someone who's telling a story brings you into the middle of something in somebody's life. They're not necessarily explaining this is exactly how they got to this point. They bring you this sort of partially formed person, and then it really triggers a lot of questions of like, wait, well then what is it that did happen that made them respond in that way? Or like, what are the things? It feels like it induces a lot of curiosity and buy-in to the mystique and the wonder of this character, instead of just being like, oh, well, the character was made by a Christian author. And it's just like, okay, well, never mind. And instead, maybe it creates space to come alongside that character and to actually like learn real life lessons from them, almost this sort of like subversive parable or something that they're taking away and like, oh man, maybe I can be a little bit like this character and respond in this way. And your faith has influenced somebody's life in a really meaningful way through a medium that is really meaningful to them.
Yeah. That's all. I think that's all right. I do have to say though, I think, there's no real rules in storytelling. For every rule that somebody tells you, you can find a counterexample, right? So I'm sure there are amazing books where, they were created like faith first, right? Like where the messaging behind it is super explicit, but it's still a successful piece of art.
Yes.
I think that's definitely true. But I'm just saying, for me, my approach has always been following, Professor Frank's advice. I think that's really worked out for me.
Live your faith and write about your life. It feels like there's a version of that for every one of us, whether or not we are an author and a cartoonist, that we can live into that. Gene, last question. What brings you the most joy when it comes to partnering with God and his world-changing work as an author and cartoonist?
Well, I mean, I think outside of my career, I think what brings me the most joy really is my family. I'm very lucky to be married to an amazing woman. We have 4 kids together. Our oldest is 22 now. He just graduated from college. and has successfully launched into adulthood. Our youngest is about to start high school, about to start her freshman year, and seeing the ways in which God meets my kids and my wife and provides for them the way He provided for me is incredibly gratifying. Within comics, I think looking back on my career, right? I've been at this for maybe 25 years now, and I think in a lot of ways I've been very blessed. A lot of the projects that I've gotten to work on have been completely unexpected, but ultimately, I think what matters most has been love. It's I think when you pursue something, right? Like when you pursue an art, when you pursue like comics or music or novel writing or whatever it is, and you give it your passion, right? You follow your calling into this art. I think a couple of things are going to happen, even if you never experience worldly success. One is you're going to find yourself falling deeper and deeper in love with that art form. The more you understand it, the more you'll appreciate it. And the richer the experience of reading other people's art or experiencing other people's art becomes. And I think that's definitely happened to me. Like, I think the experience of reading a graphic novel now is much richer than when I started. And the second way, so that's one way that love comes out of pursuing an art. The second way is that you will find yourself walking alongside people who have that same love, right? And that's definitely happened with me as well. Like, the vast majority of my cartoonist friends do not belong to any faith tradition, but they are still like among my closest friends, you know? Yeah. And we definitely, you know, we've definitely had like, especially when we were younger, we had these like long car trips down from the Bay Area to San Diego for Comic-Con. And we would just like, it'd be like, me and I had one Christian cartoonist friend, and then one of our friends is agnostic and one of us is an atheist. And we'd just be arguing the whole time down in a very friendly way. Right. But it would switch. It would switch between arguing about God and then arguing about like, I don't know, like the Marvel universe. But those conversations, they're still continuing to this day, right? The conversations about God and the Marvel universe still continue to this day. And they really have formed, the basis of friendships that have lasted decades now, right? Wow. That like even if I had never, experienced any form of worldly success within comics, those two kinds of love are still there. Like I still learn to love this form of human artistic expression deeper. And I still got to experience the love of these friendships, regardless of what happened career-wise. Those two things would still be true.
Thanks for tuning in, alumni. If you know someone who would enjoy the InterVarsity World Changers podcast, please be sure to share the episode with them. You can also support the podcast by leaving a rating and a review or by visiting our donation page in the show notes. InterVarsity World Changers is brought to you by the InterVarsity Alumni Relations Team, hosted and produced by John Steele, production assistance by Mike Centera, and edited by Caleb Leppert. Our theme song is Crazy by InterVarsity alumnus Andy Minio. Go change that world, alumni. Okay, Gene, here we are, post-credit. I said I want to hear this, your answer to this question. If you could write an untold story about any famous or not so famous, maybe, comic book hero, who is it that you would choose, and what's the story that you would tell?
I have an answer that's not so famous.
Okay.
So one of my favorite characters in the Marvel Universe is Frogman. Most people have not heard of him. He's a fairly obscure character, you know, and this is a little bit of a cheat because I have been able to do like a very, very short story on Frogman, but I've always wanted to do something much longer, you know, like 6 issues, 12 issues about him. So Frogman, here's his origin story. His father was a supervillain. He was a Spider-Man supervillain named Leapfrog, and he didn't have any superpowers or anything. What he did have was this green suit with springs at the bottom of the feet. So what he would do, he'd like go and rob a bank, and then he would hop away on his like springs on the bottom of his feet, right? And it's like lame. So Spider-Man put him in jail, and then after Spider-Man put him in jail, his son, this kid named Eugene, who's kind of a loser, you know, he's like this high school kid. He discovers that his dad was the supervillain, and he feels like deeply ashamed. He feels really sorry for all of the crimes that his father committed. And what he decides to do is he's going to use his dad's super suit with the springs at the bottom, and he's going to become Frogman, and he's going to like go and fight crime to redeem his family name. But the problem is that he is not talented at all. You know, he's like terrible at it. So every time he goes out, he like tries to team up with Spider-Man, and Spider-Man doesn't want to team up with him because he's terrible at crime fighting. But he still goes and tries anyways. So I wanna tell a story about him finally taking down this supervillain group and realizing that it's actually like his uncles and aunts, that it's his family, you know. So to sort of like bring to like take his origin to the next level. I have actually talked to I worked for Marvel for a little bit, you know, for a couple of years, and I have talked to my editor about it. What he told me was that Frogman is actually pretty popular among comic book writers. Like multiple comic book writers have proposed Frogman stories, but nobody knows him, you know, who's not like a super hardcore comic book geek. So they never thought that a Frogman story would be able to sell, you know.
Okay.
But,
all right.
That is sort of my dream project within the Marvel universe.
I love that. Thank you, Gene, so much for indulging me on that question. It's fun to hear. I get to have these kind of conversations sometimes with my friends, and you know, it's interesting to hear what they might say. But to hear somebody who has like lives in this world answer a question like that's just a super fun experience. So thank you for indulging me.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. I love any chance to talk about Frogman. I love it.